What does a chicken actually need that commercial feed is selling you, and how much of that can you produce for free on a residential lot? I tracked my feed cost per dozen eggs across 4 consecutive seasons, reducing commercial ration dependence each year. And by season 4, I was covering roughly 40% of my 12-hen flock's nutritional requirement from zero-cost sources on a half-acre in Western Virginia. The feed bill dropped by about $14 per month, not life-changing on its own, but the production numbers went up, not down. And that's the part that made me keep going. The 12 methods on this list fall into 3 categories. Zero-cost protein sources you can grow or trap passively. Zero-cost mineral supplements from materials most households discard. And management changes that cost nothing but stop the hidden production killers most people never identify. A few of these you've probably heard of. Several you haven't. And at least one is going to make you look at something on your property you've been treating as a nuisance or a liability and realize it's actually free feed. None of them require you to buy anything. Near the end, I'm covering the one trick that surprised me most when I actually tested it, the one that works through a mechanism in tap water that almost nobody in the backyard chicken world is talking about. It costs nothing to implement, and the effect on gut health is measurable. A frame that makes this list useful rather than just clever. Your hen doesn't eat feed, she eats nutrients. Commercial layer feed is a convenient delivery vehicle for protein, calcium, vitamins, and trace minerals. But it's not the only delivery vehicle, and in some cases it's not the most efficient one. Once you stop thinking about replacing feed and start thinking about replacing the nutrients feed contains, from whatever zero-cost sources are available to you, the whole approach makes sense and the production numbers follow. Duckweed is the most dramatic example on this list, and the one most people dismiss until they look at the protein percentage. USDA nutritional composition data puts dry duckweed at 35 to 45%, crude protein higher than commercial high-protein pellets and significantly higher than most plant-based supplements. A plastic storage tub, 18 to 20 inches across, roughly the diameter of a large wagon wheel, filled with water and seeded with duckweed from a nearby pond, stream, or inexpensive online source, doubles in volume every 2 to 3 days in warm weather. The birds eat it directly off the surface. Zero ongoing cost after the initial seeding. The limitation worth naming up front: duckweed production stops below 50 degrees Fahrenheit, roughly the temperature of a cool basement, and slows significantly below 65. In Ohio, Indiana, or anywhere with a real winter, this is a May through September protein source, not a year-round one. In the Deep South or the Pacific Northwest, it runs much longer. Run it during the warm months, supplement other ways in winter. 1 tub per 4 to 6 hens is a reasonable starting scale. I ran 3 tubs for 12 hens in Central Appalachia, and by July, each one was producing enough daily harvest to noticeably reduce how fast the feed bag emptied. Calcium is where most people overpay on the feed bill without thinking about it. An eggshell is 94 to 97% calcium carbonate, the same compound in commercial oyster shell. It weighs roughly 5 to 6 grams, about the weight of a large paperclip. Bake your collected kitchen eggshells at 250 degrees for 30 minutes. Just long enough to drive off any residual protein odor that might trigger egg-eating behavior, then crush them coarsely and put them out, free choice in a separate container. The hens take what they need. Your household, eating the eggs those 12 hens produce, generates roughly enough shell material over time to meaningfully offset what you'd otherwise buy. I started doing this in year 3 and stopped buying oyster shell entirely by the end of that season. The only ongoing cost is the oven time, and I do it while something else is already baking. Wood ash connects to the same mineral category from a completely different direction. Ash from hardwood or fruitwood in a fireplace, wood stove, or outdoor fire pit runs roughly 25 to 40% calcium oxide by dry weight, with meaningful potassium and phosphorus fractions, according to published analyses in the Journal of Plant Nutrition. Put it in a separate container, free choice alongside the crushed shells. Hens self-regulate intake and take very little at a sitting. The second function of wood ash is pest management. Fine ash in the dust bath area suffocates lice and mites by clogging their respiratory spiracles, which is a documented mechanism in entomological literature on dust as an insecticidal agent. You get mineral supplementation and parasite control from one material that was going in the trash. The caveat: coal ash and treated wood ash are toxic, hardwood only, and don't offer it wet. Damp ash forms lie through a calcium hydroxide reaction and will irritate skin and mucous membranes at high concentration. If you mow your entire property every week, you're mowing free protein. Chickweed, dandelion, plantain, and lamb's quarters are among the most nutritionally dense plants that grow in temperate American lawns and are not weeds in any productive sense when you have chickens. Chickweed runs 18% crude protein by USDA dry weight tables. Dandelion is high in beta-carotene and calcium. Plantain contains aucubin, an iridoid glycoside with documented anti-inflammatory properties in multiple peer-reviewed studies. Lamb's quarters runs higher in protein than most commercial garden greens and accumulates iron and calcium at concentrations that matter in a hen's diet. A 10 by 10 foot section of unmowed yard, roughly the footprint of a standard backyard storage shed, left to grow freely and rotated into the run, in sections produces a continuous standing forage strip that costs nothing to establish and nothing to maintain. Cut a section, throw it into the run, and let the next section grow out. My wife asked me once why one corner of the yard looked like it was being neglected. I told her it was managed. She pointed out those are not the same thing. She wasn't wrong, but the egg count that month was the second highest I'd tracked in 3 years. Log and stump rotation works on a completely different mechanism and takes about 60 seconds of effort per week. Take a piece of scrap lumber, a log, an old piece of carpet, or a board and lay it on bare ground outside the run for 4 to 5 days. When you lift it, you'll find earthworms, pillbugs, beetles, earwigs, and larvae that's migrated to the moist darkness underneath. Move the board into the run and let the birds work it. 3 or 4 boards rotated on a 1-week cycle produce a reliable weekly protein event that costs nothing and takes less time than filling the feeder. The decomposing wood material also contributes carbon to the deep litter bed if you let some of it fall apart in the run. Same principle, different context, as the garden composting approach I covered in the deep litter video. 2 passive insect harvesting methods that most people who run active BSFL bins don't know exist, and both cost nothing. The passive BSFL trap first. A 5-gallon bucket with 8 to 10 drainage holes drilled at 3/8 inch diameter, roughly the width of a standard pencil, placed in full sun and filled with kitchen food scraps, will naturally attract and colonize black soldier flies during warm months without any purchased starter colony. The adult flies are drawn to decomposing organic matter for egg laying. The larvae hatch, consume the scraps, and self-harvest through the drainage holes when they reach pre-pupal stage, dropping into a collection container below. No management required beyond refilling with scraps. No odor comparable to a poorly managed active bin because the larvae process the material faster than decay bacteria can establish. Works reliably across most of the continental U.S. from May through September, roughly 4 to 5 months of passive protein production. Below 60 degrees Fahrenheit, BSF adult flies stop being active and the trap goes dormant. Florida and Gulf Coast operators can run it 10 months of the year. New England and Upper Midwest operators get 4 to 5 months and need to bridge the rest with other methods. The tarp method works year-round anywhere, soil temperature stays above freezing, and requires nothing except a piece of plywood, tarp, or old carpet you'd otherwise store or discard. Lay it on bare ground in the yard. Leave it 3 to 5 days. When you lift it, earthworms and soil insects have relocated to the moist, dark environment underneath. Drop the board into the run. The birds strip it in minutes. 4 to 6 boards rotated around the property on a weekly schedule produce a consistent weekly harvest that literally costs nothing and requires about 30 seconds of effort per rotation. I've been running 5 boards on a rotation since year 2, and I have not bought dried mealworms since. The boards are lumber scraps from a fence project that's been sitting in the barn for 8 years. They now have a job. The production killer most people are treating with supplements when the actual fix costs nothing: chronic social stress. Poultry science research published in multiple peer-reviewed journals over the last 30 years documents a specific hormonal suppression pathway in laying hens under chronic stress. High corticosterone, the avian equivalent of cortisol in mammals, directly suppresses luteinizing hormone output from the pituitary gland. LH is the signal that triggers the ovarian follicle cycle and initiates egg formation. When corticosterone stays persistently high, LH output falls, and egg production drops even in hens that are otherwise well-fed and well-managed. The sources of chronic corticosterone stress in a backyard flock are specific and correctable without spending anything. An overcrowded coop, defined in the poultry science literature as below 4 square feet per bird, inside and below 8 square feet per bird in the run, consistently raises baseline corticosterone. An aggressive hen that controls feed access and repeatedly drives other hens from the feeder produces measurable stress responses in the subordinate birds. A rooster in a suburban setting where the hens can hear but not avoid his dominance behavior raises corticosterone without any physical injury. None of these require a supplement. They require a management change. Calculate your actual square footage per bird. Minimum 4 square feet inside the coop, about the size of a large kitchen floor tile, and minimum 8 square feet per bird in the run, roughly the size of a standard bathtub. If you're under those numbers, you have a production problem that no amount of feed improvement will fix. Remove or rehome persistently aggressive individuals. In a suburban setting without a rooster, consider whether the flock is better off without him from a production standpoint. The answer is usually yes. If this kind of content is useful to you, subscribe. Every week I cover practical backyard food production with real track numbers from a working residential lot in Appalachia. Nothing to sell you, just what the flock actually shows. Rainwater over tap water is the trick that produced the most skepticism when I first mentioned it in a local poultry keepers meeting, and also the one with the most solid mechanism behind it. Most municipal water systems in the United States switched from chlorine to chloramine as the primary disinfectant, starting in the late 1980s and early 1990s. Chlorine off-gases from water, left in an open container overnight. Chloramine does not. It remains stable in solution for weeks. The American Water Works Association has published extensively on chloramine stability as the reason it replaced chlorine for municipal purposes. What that stability means for a backyard flock is that every time your hens drink from a tap-fed waterer, they're ingesting a compound that is documented to disrupt lactobacillus populations at concentrations similar to what municipal systems deliver. Lactobacillus is the gut bacterium that drives nutrient absorption, immune function, and the probiotic benefit you're trying to get from fermented feed. Chloramine attacks the same population that fermented feed builds. Collecting rainwater from a roof surface into a 30 or 55-gallon barrel, roughly the volume of a standard residential trash can, and using that for the flock's primary water source bypasses this entirely. Zero ongoing cost. The setup cost depends on what you have: an old barrel, food grade or lined, under a downspout extension. In most of the U.S., rainfall is sufficient to maintain this as the primary water source from March through October. In drought conditions or dry climates, supplement with tap water rather than run the birds short. You don't have to believe the chloramine mechanism to test this. Run tap water for 30 days and track your daily egg count. Switch to rainwater for the next 30 days and track the same count on the same flock. That's the test that matters, not my experience, yours. Stinging nettles close the zero-cost protein category. If they grow wild on your property, which they do on most rural and semi-rural lots east of the Mississippi, they're free and the protein content is not what most people expect. USDA nutritional composition data puts dried nettle leaf at 25 to 30% crude protein, comparable to fish meal on a relative basis, and far above most plant-based supplements. Cut them wearing gloves, dry them in a shed or on a rack in full sun for 5 to 7 days, and crumble them into the run or mix into wet feed. The sting is completely gone after 24 hours of drying. There's nothing to manage after that. Wear gloves when cutting. That's the only instruction. A note on geography. Stinging nettles are widespread east of the Rockies and in the Pacific Northwest, but scarce in the arid Southwest and much of the Great Plains. If they're not on your property, check field edges, fence lines, and the edges of any riparian area within a reasonable distance. Once you've found them, they regrow aggressively from established root systems after cutting, which means each stand produces multiple harvests per season, without any replanting effort on your part. Cover crop run rotation is different from the fodder sprouting covered in earlier videos, and I want to be precise about that, because they're often conflated. Sprouting is a tray system in controlled indoor conditions. Cover cropping is planting directly into a resting section of the outdoor run and letting it establish in the ground. When you're rotating sections of the run for soil rest, which you should be doing on a 3 to 4 week rotation, to break the coccidia-oocyst cycle documented by Ohio State University Extension, seed the resting section with buckwheat or annual ryegrass instead of leaving it bare. Buckwheat germinates in 4 to 5 days and reaches 6 to 8 inches in height, roughly the height from the sole of your boot to the lace line, in 3 weeks. Annual ryegrass germinates in 7 to 10 days. Let the crop establish, then rotate birds into that section. They harvest green matter, seeds, and the insects the crop attracted during its growth period. Buckwheat seed runs about $1.50 per pound at most farm supply stores and covers a 10 by 10 foot section with room to spare. Annual ryegrass seed is often free from neighboring farms that overseed pastures and have surplus. The production benefit is not dramatic on its own, but the soil health benefit of the cover crop root system in a run that otherwise becomes compacted and parasitologically contaminated is real and documented in small flock management literature from Virginia Cooperative Extension. The nightlight insect trap is the last method on this list, and the one I thought was too obvious to include until I checked whether most keepers actually do it. They don't. A clamp light or an existing outdoor fixture positioned above or near the run in summer evenings concentrates flying insects, specifically moths, beetles, crane flies, and larger moths that are active from dusk onward at the wire mesh of the run. The birds pick them directly through the wire in the hour before roosting. University of Florida. Extension documents that a light source in a warm summer night concentrates 200 to 400 insects per hour within a few feet of the light. That's not a trivial amount of protein. The birds learn the routine within 3 to 4 nights. They'll be waiting at the wire at dusk. On a humid summer evening in the upper south, the insect concentration near a light source is high enough that I've watched hens work the wire for a full 45 minutes before settling to roost. It requires nothing if you already have outdoor lighting. If you don't, a $12 clamp lamp from any hardware store, plugged into an existing outlet, covers the function. 4 situations where this approach underperforms, and I want to be direct about each one. First, winter and cold climates. Of the 12 methods on this list, only eggshell recycling, wood ash, the tarp method, stinging nettle, and the management changes around cortisol work year-round in cold northern climates. Duckweed, BSFL trap, cover cropping, rainwater and drought conditions, weed zones, and the nightlight trap are all temperature dependent or seasonally limited. If you're in Minnesota or upstate New York, this list covers your warm months and you still need a winter feed strategy. Second, small flocks. Below 6 hens, the daily production from passive insect and forage methods is proportionally meaningful, but the absolute amounts are small. A tarp board producing 50 earthworms is a more impactful supplement for a 6-bird flock than a 24-bird flock. Scale your expectations accordingly. Third, dense suburban lots. The weed zone and cover crop approaches require outdoor space your birds can access or that you can harvest from directly. If you're in a neighborhood where unmowed sections of lawn generate complaints or HOA citations, pick from the other 10 methods. And fourth, compromised gut health. If your flock is dealing with an active coccidiosis outbreak, mycoplasma, or Newcastle disease, no amount of free protein fixes the underlying problem. Free choice supplements and forage enhancement work on a healthy gut. Get the pathogen issue resolved first. The chloramine and rainwater connection I promised at the start. I want to deliver this with a specific mechanism rather than a general claim because I know this audience and a general claim isn't worth the time it takes to listen to it. Here's the specific chain. Chloramine is a compound of chlorine and ammonia. Unlike free chlorine, which volatilizes from water at room temperature, chloramine is stable and persists. When a hen drinks chloramine-treated water regularly, the low-level antimicrobial effect is not selective. It suppresses lactobacillus species at the same concentrations that it suppresses pathogens. Because lactobacillus is just as susceptible to oxidative antimicrobial compounds as most gram-positive bacteria. The American Waterworks Association's technical guidance documents confirm this non-selective activity at the concentrations used in most U.S. municipal systems, typically 1 to 4 milligrams per liter. The gut lactobacillus population that you're trying to build through fermented feed is the same population that chloramine suppresses through the drinking water. If your flock is on both fermented feed and municipal tap water simultaneously, you're building one population with the feed and partially suppressing it with the water at the same time. In my tracking on 12 birds across 2 consecutive summers, switching from tap to collected rainwater in June, added roughly 1.2 eggs per day by August. That's not a controlled trial. I didn't isolate the variable perfectly because I made other changes in the same period. What I can say is that the production response was directionally consistent with what the mechanism predicts, and I haven't gone back to tap water for the flock since. Set up the barrel before the next significant rain. Put it under your largest downspout. Use whatever barrel or container you have. Test it for 30 days on your flock before you decide whether the mechanism is relevant to your situation. The cost of testing it is zero, and if the test shows no difference on your flock in your water district, you haven't lost anything. Some municipal systems run lower chloramine concentrations than others, and the effect size will vary by location. The mechanism is consistent across water chemistry. The magnitude on your specific setup is something only your flock can tell you. Pick 3 methods off this list that fit your property and your season and run them for 30 days while tracking your daily egg count. You already know your current number. Write it down today. Test changes 1 at a time if you want clean data, or stack 2 or 3 if you want faster results and don't mind not knowing exactly which one moved the number. Either approach is fine. For most people in most climates, the combination that produces the fastest return is the tarp board rotation for weekly protein, the eggshell and wood ash mineral station for free calcium, and the rainwater barrel for gut health. Those 3 together cost somewhere between $0 and the price of a used barrel. The feed bag you don't buy this month is the test result that matters. Everything else on this list is a layer on top of those 3.